how slow everything is. No, no, not quite. We're like a third. Yeah, we are actually like a third. Okay. Anyhow, let's see. I need to like go back to where I was. It's a good spot. So he's alone. Who was he talking to? Oh yeah, I remember. Okay, I'll just start here. Yeah. 5. Maston and Candlelight. As he drove slowly back towards London, Smiley ceased to be conscious of Mendel's presence. There had been a time when the mere business of driving a car was a relief to him, when he had found in the unreality of a long, solitary journey a palliative to his troubled brain, when the fatigue of several hours' driving had allowed him to forget more sombre cares. It is one of the subtle landmarks of middle age, perhaps, that he could no longer thus subdue his mind. It needed sterner measures now. He even tried on occasion to plan in his head a walk through a European city, to record the shops and buildings he would pass, for instance, in Berna on a walk from Munster to the university. But despite such energetic mental exercise, the ghosts of time present would intrude and drive his dreams away. It was Anne who had robbed him of his peace, Anne who had once made the present so important and taught him the habit of reality, and when she went there was nothing. He could not believe that Elsa Fenton had killed her husband. Her instinct was to defend, to hoard the treasures of her life, to build about herself the symbols of normal existence. There was no aggression in her, no will, but the will to preserve. But who could tell? What did Hesse write? Strange to wander in the mist, each is alone. No tree knows his neighbour, each is alone. We know nothing of one another, nothing, Smiley mused. However closely we live together, at whatever time of day or night we sound the deepest thoughts in one another, we know nothing. How am I judging Elsa Fenton? I think I understand her suffering and her frightened lies. What do I know of her? Nothing. Mendel was pointing at a signpost. This where I live, Mitcham. Not a bad spot, really. Got sick of bachelor quarters. What a decent little semi-detached down here for my retirement. Retirement? That's a long way off. Yes, 3 days. That's why I got this job. Nothing to do it, no complications. Give it to old Mendel, he'll muck it up. Well, I expect we shall both be out of the job by Monday. He drove Mendel to Scotland Yard and went on to Cambridge Circus. He realized as he walked into the building that everyone knew. It was the way they looked, some shade of difference in their glance, their attitude. He made straight for Maston's room. Maston's secretary was at the desk, and she looked up quickly as he entered. Advisor in? Yes. He's expecting you. He's alone. I shall knock and go in. But Maston had opened the door and was already calling him. He was wearing a black coat and pinstripe trousers. There goes the cabaret, thought Smiley. I've been trying to get in touch with you. Did you not receive my message? Said Maston. I did, but I couldn't possibly have spoken to you. I don't quite follow. Well, I don't believe Fenton committed suicide. I think he was murdered. I couldn't say that on the telephone. Maston took off his spectacles and looked at Smiley in blank astonishment. Murdered? Why? Well, Fenton wrote his letter at 10:30 last night, if we are to accept the time in his letter as correct. Well, at 7:55 he rang up the exchange and asked to be called at 8:30 the next morning. How on earth do you know that? I was there this morning when the exchange rang. I took the call thinking it might be from the department. How could you possibly say that it was Fenton who ordered the call? I had inquiries made. The girl at the exchange knew Fennon's voice well. She was sure it was he, and that he rang at 7:55 last night. Fennon and the girl knew each other, did they? Oh, good heavens, no. They just exchanged pleasantries occasionally. And how do you conclude from this that he was murdered? Well, I asked his wife about this call, and she lied. Said she ordered it herself. She claimed to be frightfully absent-minded. She gets the exchange to ring her occasionally, like tying a knot in a handkerchief when she has an important appointment. And another thing, just before shooting himself, he made some cocoa. He never drank it. Maston listened in silence. At last, he smiled and got up. We seem to be at cross purposes, he said. I send you down to discover why Fennon shot himself, and you come back and say he didn't. We're not policemen, Smiley. No. I sometimes wonder what we are. Did you hear of anything that affects our position here? Anything that explains his action at all? Anything to substantiate the suicide letter? Smiley hesitated before replying. He had seen it coming. Yes. I understood from Mrs. Fennon that her husband was very upset after the interview. You might as well hear the whole story. It obsessed him. He couldn't sleep after it. She had to give him a sedative. Her account of Fennon's reaction to my interview entirely substantiates the letter. He was silent for a minute, blinking rather stupidly before him. What I am trying to say is that I don't believe her. I don't believe Fennon wrote the letter, or that he had any intention of dying. He returned to Maston. We simply cannot dismiss the inconsistencies. Another thing, he plunged on. I haven't had an expert comparison, but there's a similarity between the anonymous letter and Fennon's suicide note. Type looks identical. It's ridiculous, I know, but there it is. We must bring the police in. Give them the facts. Facts? Said Maston. What facts? Suppose she did lie. She's an odd woman by all accounts, foreign, Jewish. Heaven knows the tributaries of her mind. I'm told she suffered in the war, persecuted and so forth. She may see you and the oppressor, the inquisitor. She spots you're onto something, panics and tells you the first lie that comes into her head. Does that make her a murderess? Then why did Fennon make the call? Why make himself a nightcap? Who can tell? Maston's voice was richer now, more persuasive. If you or I, Smiley, were ever driven to that dreadful point where we were determined to destroy ourselves, who can tell what our last thoughts on earth would be? And what of Fennon? He sees his career in ruins. His life has no meaning. Is it not conceivable that he should wish, in a moment of weakness or resolution, to hear another human voice, feel again the warmth of human contact before he dies? Fanciful, sentimental, perhaps, but not improbable that a man so overwrought, so obsessed that he takes his own life. Smiley had to give him credit. It was a good performance, and he was no match for Maston when it came to this. Abruptly, he felt inside himself the rising panic of frustration beyond endurance. With panic came an uncontrollable fury with this posturing sycophant, this obscene sissy with his greying hair and his reasonable smile. Panic and fury welled up in a sudden tide, flooding his breast, suffusing his whole body. His face felt hot and red, his spectacles blurred, and tears sprang to his eyes, adding to his humiliation. Maston went on, mercifully unaware. You cannot expect me to suggest to the Home Secretary on this evidence that the police have reached a false conclusion. You know how tenuous our police liaison is. On the one hand, we have your suspicions that in short Fennon's behaviour last night was not consistent with the intent to die. His wife has apparently lied to you. Against that, we have the opinion of trained detectives who found nothing disturbing in the circumstances of death, and we have Mrs. Fennon's statements that her husband was upset by his interview. I'm sorry, Smiley, but there it is. There was a complete silence. Smiley was slowly recovering himself, and the process left him dull, inarticulate. He peered myopically before him, his pouchy, lined face still pink, his mouth slack and stupid. Maston was waiting for him to speak, but he was tired and suddenly utterly disinterested. Without a glance at Maston, he got up and walked out. He reached his own room and sat down at the desk. Mechanically, he looked through his work. His in-tray contained little, some office circulars and a personal letter addressed to G. Smiley, Esquire, Ministry of Defence. The handwriting was unfamiliar. He opened the envelope and read the letter. Dear Smiley, it is essential that I should lunch with you tomorrow at the Compleat Angler Marlow. Please do your best to meet me there at 1 o'clock. There is something I have to tell you. Yours, Samuel Fennon. The letter was handwritten and dated the previous day, Tuesday, the 3rd of January. It had been postmarked in Whitehall at 6 o'clock p.m. He looked at it stodgily for several minutes, holding it stiffly before him and inclining his head to the left. Then he put the letter down, opened a drawer of the desk, and took out a single clean sheet of paper. He wrote a brief letter of resignation to Maston, and attached Fennon's invitation with the pin. He pressed the bell for a secretary, left the letter in his out tray, and made for the lift. As usual, it was stuck in the basement with the registry's tea trolley, and after a short wait, he began walking downstairs. Halfway down, he remembered that he had left his mackintosh and a few bits and pieces in his room. Never mind, he thought. They'll send them on. He sat in his car in the car park, staring through the drenched windscreen. He didn't care. He just damn well didn't care. It was surprise, certainly. Surprise that he had so nearly lost control. Interviews had played a great part in Smiley's life, and he had long ago come to consider himself proof against them all. Disciplinary, scholastic, medical, and religious. His secretive nature detested the purpose of all interviews, their oppressive intimacy, their inescapable reality. He remembered one deliriously happy dinner with Anne at Quaglino's when he had described to her the chameleon armadillo system for beating the interviewer. They had dined by candlelight, white skin and pearls. They were drinking brandy, Anne's eyes wide and moist only for him, Smiley playing the lover and doing it wonderfully well, Anne loving him and thrilled by their harmony. And so I learned first to be a chameleon. You mean you sat there burping, you rude toad? No, it's a matter of colour. Chameleons can change colour. Of course they can change colour. They sit on green leaves and go green. Did you go green, Toad? His fingers ran lightly over the tips of hers. Listen, minx, while I explain the Smiley chameleon armadillo technique for the impertinent interviewer. Her face was very close to his, and she adored him with her eyes. The technique is based on the theory that the interviewer, loving no one as well as himself, will be attracted by his own image. You therefore assume the exact social, temperamental, political, and intellectual colour of your inquisitor. Pompous toad, but intelligent lover. Silence. Sometimes this method flounders against the idiocy or ill disposition of the inquisitor. If so, become an armadillo. And wear linear belts, Toad. No, place him in a position so incongruous that you are superior to him. I was prepared for confirmation by a retired bishop. I was his whole flock, and received on 1/2 holiday sufficient guidance for a diocese. But by contemplating the bishop's face, and imagining that under my gaze it became covered in thick fur, I maintained the ascendancy. From then on, the skill grew. I could turn him into an ape, get him stuck in sash windows, send him naked to Masonic banquets, condemn him like the serpent to go out about on his belly. Wicked lover toad. And so it had been. But in his recent interviews with Maston, the power of detachment had left him. He was getting too involved. When Maston made the first moves, Smiley had been too tired and disgusted to compete. He supposed Elsa Fenton had killed her husband, that she had some good reason, and it did not bother him any more. The problem no longer existed. Suspicion, experience, perception, common sense. For Maston, these were not the organs of fact. Paper was fact. Ministers were fact. Home secretaries were hard fact. The department did not concern itself with the vague impressions of a single officer when they conflicted with policy. Smiley was tired, deeply, heavily tired. He drove slowly homewards. Dinner out tonight. Something rather special. It was only lunchtime now. He could spend the afternoon pursuing Illyrius across the Russian continent on his Hansa voyage. And dinner at Quaglino's, and a solitary toast to the successful murderer, to Elsa, perhaps, in gratitude for ending the career of George Smiley with the life of Sam Fenton. He remembered to collect his laundry in Sloane Street, and finally turned into Bywater Street, finding a parking space about 3 houses down from his own. He got out carrying the brown paper parcel of laundry, locked the car laboriously, and walked all around it from habit, testing the handles. A thin rain was still falling. It annoyed him that someone had parked outside his house again. Thank goodness Mrs. Chappell had closed his bedroom window, otherwise the rain would have... He was suddenly alert. Something had moved in the drawing room. A light, a shadow, a human form. Something, he was certain. Was it sight or instinct? Was it the latent skill of his own tradescraft which informed him? Some fine sense or nerve, some remote faculty of perception warned him now, and he heeded the warning. Without a moment's thought, he dropped his keys back into his overcoat pocket, walked up the steps to his own front door and rang the bell. It echoed shrilly through the house. There was a moment silent. Then came to Smiley's ears the distinct sound of footsteps approaching the door, firm and confident. A scratch of the chain, a click of the Ingersoll latch, and the door was opened swiftly, cleanly. Smiley had never seen him before. Tall, fair, handsome, 35-odd. A light grey suit, white shirt, and silver tie. Habile and diplomat. German or Swede? His left hand remained nonchalantly in his jacket pocket. Smiley peered at him apologetically. "Good afternoon. Is Mr. Smiley in, please?" The door was opened to its fullest extent. A tiny pause. "Yes. Won't you come in?" For a fraction of a second he hesitated. "No, thanks. Would you please give him this?" He handed him the parcel of laundry, walked down the steps again to his car. He knew he was still being watched. He started the car, turned, and drove into Sloane Square without a glance in the direction of his house. He found a parking space in Sloane Street, pulled in, and rapidly wrote in his diary 7 sets of numbers. They belonged to the 7 cars parked along Bywater Street. What should he do? Stop a policeman? Whoever he was probably gone by now. Besides, there were other considerations. He locked the car again and crossed the road to a telephone kiosk. He rang Scotland Yard, got through to the special branch, and asked for Inspector Mendel. But it appeared that the inspector, having reported back to the superintendent, had discreetly anticipated the pleasures of retirement and left for Mitcham. Smiley got his address after a good deal of prevarication and set off once more into his car, covering 3 sides of a square and emerging at Albert Bridge. He had a sandwich and large whisky at a new pub overlooking the river, and a quarter of an hour later was crossing the bridge on the way to Mitcham, the rain still beating down on his inconspicuous little car. He was worried. Very worried indeed. T6. Tea and sympathy. It was still raining as he arrived. Mendel was in his garden wearing the most extraordinary hat Smiley had ever seen. It had begun life as an Anzac hat, but its enormous brim hung low all the way round, so that he resembled nothing so much as a very tall mushroom. He was brooding over a tree stump, a wicked-looking pickaxe poised obediently in his sinewy right hand. He looked at Smiley sharply for a moment. Then a grin slowly crossed his thin face as he extended his hand. "Trouble?" said Mendel. "Trouble." Smiley followed him up the path into the house, suburban and comfortable. "There's no fire in the living room. I only just got back. How about a cup of tea in the kitchen?" They went into the kitchen. Smiley was amused to notice the extreme tidiness, the almost feminine neatness of everything about him. Only the police calendar on the wall spoilt the illusion. While Mendel put a kettle on and busied himself with cups and saucers, Smiley related dispassionately what had happened in Bywater Street. When he had finished, Mendel looked at him for a long time in silence. "But why'd he ask you in?" Smiley blinked and coloured a little. "That's what I wondered. He put me off my balance for a moment. It was lucky I had the parcel." He took a drink of tea, though I don't believe he was taken in by the parcel. Maybe, I doubt it. I doubt it very much. "Not taken in? Well, I wouldn't have been. Little man in a Ford delivers parcels of linen. Who could I have been? Besides, I asked for Smiley and didn't want to see him." "Huh, he must have thought that was pretty queer." "What was he after? What would he have done with you?" "You did. Who did he think you were?" "That's just the point. That's just it, you see. I think it was me he was waiting for. But of course he didn't expect me to ring the bell. I put him off balance. I think he wanted to kill me. That's why he asked me in. He recognized me, but only just. Probably from a photograph." Mendel looked at him in silence for a while. "Christ," he said. "Suppose I'm right," Smiley continued, "all the way. Suppose Fenton was murdered last night, and I did nearly follow him this morning. Well, unlike your trade, mine doesn't normally run to a murder a day." "Meaning what?" "I don't know. I just don't know. Perhaps before we go much further, you'd check on these cars for me? They were parked in Bywater Street this morning." "Why not do it yourself?" Smiley looked at him puzzled for a second. Then dawned on him that he hadn't mentioned his resignation. "Sorry, I didn't tell you, did I? I resigned this morning. I just managed to get it done before I was sacked. So I'm free as air, about as employable." Mendel took the list of numbers from him and went into the hall to telephone. He returned a couple of minutes later. "They'll ring back in an hour," he said. "Come on, I'll show you around the state. You know anything about bees, do you?" "Well, a very little, yes. I got bitten with a natural history bug at Oxford." He's going to tell Mendel how he had wrestled with Goethe's metamorphoses of plants and animals in the hope of discovering, like Faust, what sustains the world at its most inmost point. He wanted to explain why it was impossible to understand 19th century Europe without a working knowledge of the naturalistic sciences. He felt earnest and full of important thoughts, and knew secretly that this was because his brain was wrestled with the day's events, that he was in a state of nervous excitement. The palms of his hands were moist. Mendel led him out to the back door. 3 neat beehives stood against a low brick wall which ran along the end of the garden. Mendel spoke as they stood in the fine rain. Always want to keep 'em, see what it's all about. Being rearing it all up frightens me stiff, I can tell you. Oh, little beggars. He nodded a couple of times in support of this statement, and Smiley looked at him again with interest. His face was thin, but muscular. His expression entirely uncommunicative. His iron grey hair was cut very short and spiky. He seemed quite indifferent to the weather, and the weather to him. Smiley knew exactly the life that lay behind Mendel, had seen in policemen all over the world the same leathern skin, the same reserves of patience, bitterness, and anger. He could guess the long, fruitless hours of surveillance in every kind of weather, waiting for someone who might never come, or come and go too quickly. And he knew how much Mendel and the rest of them were at the mercy of personalities, capricious and bullying, nervous and changeful, occasionally wise and sympathetic. He knew how intelligent men could be broken by the stupidity of their superiors, how weeks of patient work, night and day, could be cast aside by such a man. Mendel led him up the precarious path laid with broken stone to the beehives, and, still oblivious of the rain, began taking one to pieces, demonstrating and explaining. He spoke in jerks, with quite long pauses between the phrases, indicating precisely and slowly with his slim fingers. At last they went indoors again, and Mendel showed him the 2 downstairs rooms. The drawing room was all flowers, flowered curtains and carpet, flowered covers on the furniture. In a small cabinet in one corner were some Toby drugs and a pair of very handsome pistols beside a cup for target shooting. Smiley followed him upstairs. There was a smell of paraffin from the stove on the landing, and a surly bubbling from the cistern in the lavatory. Mendel showed him his own bedroom. Bridal chamber. Bought the bed at a sale for £1. Box spring mattress. Amazing what you can pick up. Carpets are ex-Queen Elizabeth. Change them every year. Bought them at a store in Watford. Smiley stood in the doorway, somehow rather embarrassed. Mendel turned back and passed him to open the other bedroom door. And that's your room, if you want it. He turned to Smiley. I wouldn't stay at your place tonight if I were you. You never know, do you? Besides, you'll sleep better here. Air's better. Smiley began to protest. Up to you. You do what you like. Mendel grew slowly and embarrassed. Don't understand your job, to be honest, any more than you know police work. You do what you like. From what I've seen of you, you can look after yourself. They went downstairs again. Mendel had lit the gas fire in the drawing room. Well, at least you must give me your dinner tonight, said Smiley. The telephone rang in the hall. It was Mendel's secretary about the car numbers. Mendel came back. He handed Smiley a list of 7 names and addresses. 4 of the 7 could be discounted. The registered addresses were in Bywater Street. 3 remained. A hired car from the firm of Adam Scar and Sons of Battersea, a trade van belonging to the 7 Tile Company, Eastbourne, and the 3rd was listed specially as the property of the Panamanian ambassador. I got a man in the Panamanian job now. There'll be no difficulty there. Only got 3 cars of the embassy strength. Battersea's not far, Mendel continued. We pop in there together, in your car. Oh, by all means, Smiley said quickly. And we can go in to Kensington for dinner. I'll book a table at the Entrechat. It is 4. They sat for a while talking in a rather desultory way about bees and housekeeping. Mendel quite at ease, and Smiley still bothered and awkward, trying to find a way of talking, trying not to be clever. He could guess what Anne would have said about Mendel. She would have loved him, made a person of him, had a special voice and face for imitating him, would have made a story of him until he fitted into their lives and wasn't a mystery anymore. Darling, who'd have thought you'd be so cozy? Last man I ever thought would tell me where to buy cheap fish. What a darling little house. No bother. It was no Toby jugs of hell. He doesn't care. I think he's a pet. Oh, do ask him to dinner. You must. Not to giggle at, but to like. He wouldn't have asked him, of course, but Anne would be content. She'd found a way to like him, and having done so, forgotten him. That was what Smiley wanted. Really, a way to like Mendel. He's not as quick as Anne at finding one. But Anne was Anne. She practically murdered an Etonian nephew once for drinking claret with fish. But if Mendel had lit a pipe over her crepe Suzette, she probably would not have noticed. Mendel made more tea and they drank it. At about 5:15 they set off for Battersea in Smiley's car. On the way, Mendel bought an evening paper. He read it with difficulty, catching the light from the street lamps. After a few minutes, he spoke with sudden venom. Krauts! Bloody Krauts! God, I hate them! Krauts! Krauts! Hans, Jerry's bloody Germans! Wouldn't give you 6 pence for the lot of them. Carnivorous ruddy sheep, kicking Jews about again, all over. Knock 'em down, set 'em up, forgive and forget. Why? Bloody well forget, I'd like to know. Why forget thefts, murder and rape just because millions committed it? Christ, one poor little sod of a bank clerk pinches 10 bob and the whole of the Metropolitan's on him. But Krupp and all that mob, oh, no. Christ, if I was a Jew in Germany, I'd... Smiley was suddenly wide awake. What would you do? What would you do, Mendel? No, I suppose I'd sit down under it. It's statistics now. Politics. It isn't sense to give them the H-bomb, so it's politics. And there's the Yanks, millions of ruddy Jews in America. And what do? Damn all. Give the Krauts more bombs, all chums together, blow each other up. Mendel was trembling with rage. And Smiley was silent for a while, thinking of Elsa Fenner. What's the answer? He asked, just for something to say. Christ knows, said Mendel savagely. They turned into Battersea Bridge Road and drew up beside a constable standing on the pavement. Mendel showed his police card. Scar's garage. Well, it isn't hardly a garage, sir, just a yard. Scrap metal he handles mostly, and second-hand cars. If they won't do for one, they'll do for the other. That's what Adam says. You want to go down Prince of Wales Drive till you come to the hospital. It's tucked in there between a couple of prefabs. Bomb site it is, really. Old Adam straightened it out with some cinders, and no one's ever moved him. You seem to know a lot about him, said Mendel. I should do. I've run him in a few times. There's not much in the book that Adam hasn't been up to. He's one of our hardy perennials, Scar is. Well, anything on him at present? Couldn't say, sir. But you can have him any time for illegal betting. Madame's practically under the Act already. They drove towards Battersea Hospital. The park on their right looked black and hostile against the street lamps. What's under the Act? Asked Smiley. Oh, he's only joking. It means your record's so long you're eligible for preventive detention. Years of it. He sounds like my type, Mendel continued. Leave him to me. They found the yard as the constable had described, between two dilapidated prefabs in an uncertain row of hutments erected on the bomb site. Rubble, clinker, and refuse lay everywhere. Bits of asbestos, timber, and old iron, presumably acquired by Mr. Scar for resale or adaptation, were piled in a corner, dimly lit by the pale glow which came from the farther prefab. The two men looked round them in silence for a moment. Then Mendel shrugged, put 2 fingers in his mouth, and whistled shrilly. "Scar!" he called. Silence. The outside light on the far prefab went on, and 3 or 4 pre-war cars in various stages of dilapidation became dimly discernible. The door opened slowly, and a girl about 12 stood on the threshold. "You're dead in, dear?" asked Mendel. "Nope. Gone to the prod, I expect." "Righto, dear. Thanks." They walked back to the road. "What on earth's the prod? Or daren't I ask?" said Smiley. "Prodigal's Calf, pub round the corner. We can walk it, only 100 yards. Leave the car here." It was only just after opening time. The public bar was empty, and as they waited for the landlord to appear in the door swung open, and a very fat man in a black suit came in. He walked straight to the bar and hammered on it with a half-crown. "Wilf!" he shouted. "Take your finger out! You got customers, you lucky boy!" He turned to Smiley. "Good evening, friend." From the rear of the pub, a voice replied, "Tell him to leave the money on the counter and come back later." The fat man looked at Mendel and Smiley blankly for a moment, and suddenly let out a peal of laughter. "Not them, Bill! They're busies!" The joke appealed to him so much that he was finally compelled to sit on the bench that ran along the side of the room, with his hands on his knees, his huge shoulders heaving with laughter, the tears running down his cheeks. Occasionally he said, "Oh dear! Oh dear!" as he caught his breath before another outburst. Smiley looked at him with interest. He wore a very dirty, stiff white collar with rounded edges, a flowered red tie carefully pinned outside the black waistcoat, army boots, and a shiny black suit, very threadbare and without a vestige of a crease in the trousers. His shirt cuffs were black with sweat, grime, and motor oil, and held in place by paper clips twisted into a knot. The landlord appeared and took their orders. The stranger bought a large whiskey and a ginger wine, and took it at once to the saloon bar, where there was a coal fire. The landlord watched him with disapproval. "That's him all over. Mean sod. Won't pay saloon prices, but likes the fire." "Who is he?" asked Mendel. "Him. Scar, his name is. Adam Scar. Christ knows why Adam. See him in the Garden of Eden? Bloody grotesque, that's what it is. They say round here that if Eve gave him an apple, he'd eat the ruddy core." The landlord sucked his teeth and shook his head. And he shouted to Scar, "Still, you're good for business, aren't you, Adam? They come bloody miles to see you, don't they? Teenage monster from outer space, that's what you are. Come and see. Adam Scar, one look and you'll sign the pledge." More hilarious laughter. Mendel leaned over to Smiley. "You go and wait in the car. You better get out of this. Got a $5?" Smiley gave him £5 from his wallet, nodded his agreement, and walked out. You could imagine nothing more frightful than dealing with Scar. "You, Scar," said Mendel. "Friend, you are correct. TRX 0891, that your car?" Mr. Scar frowned at his whiskey and ginger. The question seemed to sadden him. "Well," said Mendel. "She was, Squire, she was." "What the hell do you mean?" Scar raised his right hand a few inches, then let it gently fall. "Dark waters, Squire, murky waters. Listen, I got bigger fish to fry than ever you dreamed of. I'm not made of glass, see? I couldn't care bloody less about your racket. Where's the car? Scar appeared to consider this speech on its merit. I see the light, friend. You wish for information. Of course I bloody well do. These are hard times, Squire. The cost of living, dear boy, is a rising star. Information is an item, a saleable item, is it not? You tell me who hired that car, and you won't starve. I don't starve now, friend. I want to eat better. A fiver. Scar finished his drink and replaced his glass noisily on the table. Mendel got up and bought him another. It was pinched, said Scar. I had a few years for self-drive, see, for the depot. The what? The depot. The deposit. Bloke wants a car for a day. You take 20 quid, deposit and notes, right? When he comes back, he owes you 40 bob, see? You give a cheque for 38 quid, show it on your books as a loss, and the job's worth a tenner. Got it? Mendel nodded. Well, 3 weeks ago, a bloke came in, tall Scotsman, well-to-do he was, carried a stick. He paid the depot, took the car. I never see him, nor the car again. Robbery. I want to report it to the police. Scar paused and drank from his glass. He looked at Mendel sadly. Many factors would argue against, Squire. Meaning you'd pinched it yourself? Scar looked shocked. I have since heard distressing rumours about the party in which I obtained the vehicle. I will say no more, he added piously. When you rented him the car, he filled in the forms, didn't he? Insurance, receipt, and so on. Where are they? False? All false? He gave me an address in Ealing. I went there and didn't exist. I no doubt the name was also fictitious. Mendel screwed the money into a roll in his pocket and handed it across the table to Scar. Scar unfolded it, and quite unself-conscious, he counted it in full view of anyone who cared to look. I know where to find you, said Mendel. I know a few things about you. If that's a load of cock you sold me, I'll break your bloody neck. It was raining again, and Smiley wished he had brought a hat. He crossed the road, entered the side street, which accommodated Mr. Scar's establishment, and walked towards the car. There was no one in the street. It was oddly quiet. 200 yards down the road, Battersea General Hospital, small and neat, shed multiple beams of light from its uncurtained windows. The pavement was very wet, and the echo of his own footsteps was crisp and startling. He drew level with the first of the 2 prefabs, which bordered Scar's yard. A car was parked in the yard with its side lights on. Curious, Smiley turned off the street and walked towards it. It was an old MG saloon, green probably, or that brown they went in for before the war. The number plate was barely lit and caked in mud. He stopped to read it, tracing the letters with his forefinger. TRX 0891. Of course, that was one of the numbers he had written down this morning. He heard a footstep behind him and stood up, half turning. He began to raise his arm as the blow fell. It was a terrible blow. It seemed to split his skull into 2. As he fell, he could feel the warm blood running freely over his left ear. Not again, oh Christ, not again, thought Smiley. But he hardly felt the rest. Just a vision of his own body far away, being slowly broken like rock, cracked and split into fragments. Then nothing. Nothing but the warmth of his own blood as it ran over his face into the cinders, and far away the beating of the stonebreakers. But not here. Far away. 7. Mr. Scar's story. Mendel looked at him and wondered whether he was dead. He emptied the pockets of his own overcoat and laid it gently over Smiley's shoulders. Then he ran like a madman towards the hospital, crashed through the swing doors of the outpatients department into the bright 24-hour interior of the hospital. A young coloured doctor was on duty. Mendel showed him his card, shouted something to him, took him by the arm, tried to lead him down the road. The doctor smiled patiently, shook his head, and telephoned for an ambulance. Mendel ran back down the road and waited. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived and skillful men gathered Smiley up and took him away. Bury him, thought Mendel. I'll make the bastard pay. He stood there for a moment, staring down at the wet patch of mud and cinders where Smiley had fallen. The red glow of the car's rear light showed him nothing. The ground had been hopelessly churned by the feet of the ambulance men and a few inhabitants from the prefabs who had come and gone like shadowy vultures. Trouble was about. They didn't like trouble. Bastard, Mendel hissed and walked slowly back towards the pub. The saloon bar was filling up. Scar was ordering another drink. Mendel took him by the arm. Scar turned and said, "Hello, friend. Back again? Have a little what killed Auntie?" "Shut up," said Mendel. "I want another word with you. Come outside." Mr. Scar shook his head and sucked his teeth sympathetically. "Can't be done, friend, can't be done. Company," he indicated with his head an 18-year-old blonde with off-white lipstick and an improbable bosom, who sat quite motionless at the corner table. Her painted eyes had a permanently startled look. "Listen," whispered Mendel. "In just 2 seconds, I'll tear your bloody ears off, you lying sod." Scar consigned his drinks to the care of the landlord and made a slow, dignified exit. He didn't look at the girl. Mendel led him across the street towards the prefabs. The side lights of Smiley's car shone towards them 80 yards down the road. They turned into the yard. The MG was still there. Mendel had Scar firmly by the arm, ready if necessary to force the forearm back and upwards, breaking or dislocating the shoulder joint. "Well, well," cried Scar with apparent delight. "She's returned to the bosom of her ancestors." "Stolen, was it?" said Mendel. "Stolen by a tall Scotsman with a walking stick and an address in Ealing. Decent of him to bring it back, wasn't it? Friendly gesture after all this time. You're mistaken your bloody market, Scar." Mendel was shaking with anger. "And why are the sidelights on?" "Open the door." Scar turned to Mendel in the dark, his free hand slapping his pockets in search of the keys. He extracted a bunch of 3 or 4, felt through them, and finally unlocked the car door. Mendel got in, found the passenger light in the roof, and switched it on. He began methodically to search the inside of the car. Scar stood outside and waited. He searched quickly, but thoroughly. Glove tray, seats, floor, rear window ledge. Nothing. He slipped his hand inside the map pocket on the passenger door and drew out a map and an envelope. The envelope was long and flat, grey-blue in colour with a linen finish. Continental, thought Mendel. There was no writing on it. He tore it open. There were 10 used £5 notes inside, and a piece of plain postcard. Mendel held it to the light and read the message printed on it with the ball-point pen. Finished. Now, sell it. There was no signature. He got out of the car and seized Scar by the elbows. Scar stepped back quickly. "What's your problem, friend?" he asked. Mendel spoke softly. "It's not my problem, Scar. It's yours. The biggest bloody problem you ever had. Conspiracy to murder, attempted murder, offences against the Official Secrets Act. And you can add to that contravention of the Road Traffic Act, conspiracy to defraud the Inland Revenue, and about 15 other charges that will occur to me while you nurse your problem on a cell bed. Just a minute, Copper. Let's not go over the moon. What's the story? I was talking about murder. Listen, Scar. You're a little man come in on the fringe of the big spenders, aren't you? Well, you're the big spender. I reckon it'll cost you 15 years. No, it won't. Little man, you're caught between two big ones, see, and you're the mug. And what will I do? I bloody well laugh myself sick while you rot in the scrubs and contemplate your fat belly. See that hospital, do you? There's a bloke dying in there. Murdered by your tall Scotsman. I found him half an hour ago, bleeding like a pig in your yard. There's another one dead in Surrey, and for all I know, there's one in every bloody home county. So it's your problem, you poor sod, not mine. Nothing. You're the only one who knows who he is, aren't you? You might want to tidy that up a bit, mightn't he? Scar walked slowly round to the other side of the car. Mendel sat in the driving seat and unlocked the passenger door from the inside. Scar sat himself beside him. They didn't put the light on. "I'm in a nice way of business round here," said Scar quietly, "and the pickings is small but regular. Or was, till this bloke come along." "What bloke?" "Bit by bit. Copper, don't rush me. That was 4 years ago. I didn't believe in Father Christmas till I met him. Dutch, he said he was, in the diamond business. I'm pretending I thought he was straight, see, because you're not barming, nor am I. Or else what he done he never told me, but I guess it was smuggling. Money to burn, he had. Come off him like leaves in autumn. Scar, he said, you're a man of business. I don't like publicity, never did. And ours were birds of a feather. I want a car. Not to keep, but to borrow. He didn't put it quite like that because of the lingo, but that's the sense of it. What's your proposition? I says. Let's have a proposition. Well, he says, I'm shy. I want a car that no one can ever get onto. Suppose I had an accident. Buy a car for me, Scar. Nice old car with something under the bonnet. Buy it in your own name, he says, and keep it wrapped up for me. There's 500 quid for a start, and 20 quid a month for garaging. There's a bonus, Scar, for every day I take it out. But I'm shy, see, and you don't know me. That's what's the money's for, he says. It's not for knowing me. I'll never forget that day. Raining cats and dogs it was, and me bent over an old taxi I got off of a bloke in Wandsworth. I owed a bookie 40 quid, and the coppers were sensitive about a car I bought that never flogged in Clapham. Mr. Scar drew breath and let it out again with an air of comic resignation. There he was, standing over me like my own conscience, showering old singles on me like used tote tickets. What did he look like? Asked Mendel. Quite young he was. Tall, fair chap, but cool. Cool as charity. Never saw him after the day. He sent me letters posted in London and typed on plain paper. Just, be ready Monday night. Be ready Thursday night, and so on. We had all arranged. I left the car out in the yard full of petrol and teed up. He never said when he'd be back. Just ran about closing time or later, leaving the lights on and the doors locked. He put a couple of quid in the mat pocket for each day he'd been away. What happened if anything went wrong? If he got pinched for something else? We had a telephone number. He told me to ring and ask for a name. What name? He told me to choose one. I chose Blondie. He didn't think that was very funny, but we stuck to it. Primrose 0098. Did you ever use it? Yes. A couple of years ago, I took a bint to Margate for 10 days. I thought we'd better him know. A girl answered the phone, Dutch too by the sound of her. She said Blondie was in Holland and she'd take a message. But after that, I didn't bother. Why not? I began to notice, see. It came regular once a fortnight, the first and third Tuesdays, except January and February. This was the first January he'd come. He brought the car back Thursday usually. Odd, him coming back tonight. But this is the end of him, isn't it? Scar held in his enormous hand the piece of postcard he had taken from Mendel. Did he miss it at all? Away long periods? Winters he kept away more. January never come, nor February, like I said. Mendel still had the £50 note in his hand. He tossed them into Scar's lap. Don't think you're lucky. I wouldn't be in your shoes for 10 times that lot. I'll be back. Mr. Scar seemed worried. I wouldn't have preached, he said, but I don't want to be mixed up in nothing, see. Not if the old country's going to be surf, eh, Squire? Oh, shut up, said Mendel. He was tired. He took the postcard back, got out of the car, and walked away towards the hospital. There was no news at the hospital. Smiley was still unconscious. The CID had been informed. Mendel would do better to leave his name and address and go home. The hospital would telephone as soon as they had any news. After a good deal of argument, Mendel obtained from the sister the key to Smiley's car. Mitcham, he decided, was a lousy place to live. Eight. Reflections in a hospital ward. He hated the bed as a drowning man hates the sea. He hated the sheets that imprisoned him so that he could move neither hands nor foot. And he hated the room because it frightened him. There was a trolley by the door with instruments on it, scissors, bandages, and bottles, strange objects that carried the terror of the unknown, swathed in white linen for the last communion. There were jugs, tall ones, half covered with napkins, standing like white eagles waiting to tear at his entrails. Little glass ones with rubber tubing coiled inside them like snakes. He hated everything, and he was afraid. He was hot, and the sweat ran off him. It was cold, and the sweat held him, trickling over his ribs like cold blood. Night and day alternated without recognition from Smiley. He fought a relentless battle against sleep. For when he closed his eyes, they seemed to turn inwards on the chaos of his brain. And when sometimes by sheer weight his eyelids drew themselves together, he would summon all his strength to tear them apart and stare again at the pale light wavering somewhere above him. Then came a blessed day when someone must have drawn the blinds and let in the grey winter light. He heard the sound of traffic outside and knew at last that he would live. So the problem of dying once more became an academic one, a debt he would postpone until he was rich and could pay in his own way. It was a luxurious feeling, almost a purity. His mind was wonderfully lucid, ranging like Prometheus over his whole world, where he had just heard that the mind becomes separated from the body, rules a paper kingdom. He was bored by the light above him, and wished there was more to look at. He was bored by the grapes, the smell of honeycomb and the flowers, the chocolate. He wanted books and literary journals. How could he keep up with his reading if they gave him no books? There was so little research done on his period as it was, so little creative criticism on the 17th century. It was 3 weeks before Mendel was allowed to see him. He walked in holding a new hat and carrying a book about bees. He put his hat on the end of the bed and book on the bedside table. He was grinning. "Bought you a book," he said, "about bees and clever little beggars. Might interest you." He sat on the edge of the bed. "I got a new hat. Daft, really. Celebrate my retirement." "Oh yes, I forgot. You're on the shelf too." They both laughed and were silent again. Smiley blinked. "I'm afraid you're not very distinct at the moment. I'm not allowed to wear my old glasses. They're getting me some new ones." He paused. "You don't know who did this to me, do you?" "May do. Depends. Got a lead, I think. I don't know enough, that's the trouble. About a job, I mean. Does the East German steel mission mean anything to you?" "Yes, I think so. It came here 4 years ago to try and get a foot in the Board of Trade." Mendel gave an account of his transactions with Mr. Scar. Said it was Dutch. The only way Scar had of getting in touch with him was by ringing a Primrose telephone number. "I checked the subscriber. This is the East German Steel Mission in Belsize Park. He sent a bloke to sniff around. They've cleared out. Nothing there at all. No furniture, nothing. Just a telephone, and that's been ripped out of its socket." "When did they go?" "The 3rd of January, same day as Fenner was murdered." He looked at Smiley quizzically. Smiley thought for a minute and said, "Get hold of Peter Gwilym at the Ministry of Defence and bring him here tomorrow. By the scruff of the neck." Mendel picked up his hat and walked to the door. "Goodbye," said Smiley. "Thank you for the book." "See you tomorrow," said Mendel, and left. Smiley lay back in bed. His head was aching. "Damn," he thought. "I never thanked him for the honey. It had come from Fortnum's too." Why the early morning call? That was what puzzled him more than anything. It was silly, really, Smiley supposed, but of all the unaccountables in the case, that worried him most. Elsa Fennon's explanation had been so stupid, so noticeably unlikely. And, yes, she would make the exchange stand on its head if she'd felt like it. But not Elsa Fennon. There was nothing in that alert, intelligent little face. Nothing in her total independence to support the ludicrous claim to absent-mindedness. She could have said that the exchange had made a mistake, had called the wrong day, anything. Fennon, yes, he had been absent-minded. He was one of the old inconsistencies about Fennon's character which had emerged in the inquiries before the interview. A voracious reader of westerns and a passionate chess player, a musician and a spare-time philosopher, a deep-thinking man, but absent-minded. There had been a frightful row once about him taking some secret papers out of the Foreign Office. It turned out that he had put them in his dispatch case with his Times and the evening paper before going home to Wollaston. Had Elsa Fennon, in a panic, taken upon herself the mantle of a husband? Or the motive of a husband? Had Fennon asked for the call to remind him of something, and had Elsa borrows the motive? Then what did Fennon need to be reminded of? And what did his wife so strenuously wish to conceal? Samuel Fennon. The new world and the old met in him. The eternal Jew, cultured, cosmopolitan, self-determinate, industrious and perceptive too. To Smiley, immensely attractive. The child of a century, persecuted like Elsa, and driven from his adopted Germany to university in England. By the sheer weight of his ability, he had pushed aside disadvantage and prejudice, finally to enter the Foreign Office. It had been a remarkable achievement, owed to nothing but his own brilliance. And if he was a little conceited, a little disinclined to bias the decision of minds more pedestrian than his own, who could blame him? There had been some embarrassment when Fenton pronounced himself in favour of a divided Germany, but it had all blown over. He had been transferred to an Asian desk, and the affair was forgotten. For the rest, he had been generous to a fault, and popular both in Whitehall and in Surrey, where he devoted several hours each week-end to charity work. His great love was skiing. Every year he took all his leave at once and spent 6 weeks in Switzerland or Austria. He had visited Germany only once, Smiley remembered, with his wife about 4 years ago. It had been natural enough that Fenton should join the left at Oxford. It was the great honeymoon period of university communism, and its causes, heaven knows, lay close enough to his heart. The rise of fascism in Germany and Italy, the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the Franco Rebellion in Spain, the slump in America, and above all, the wave of anti-Semitism that was sweeping across Europe. It was inevitable that Fenton should seek an outlet for his anger and revulsion. Besides, the party was respectable then. The failure of the Labour Party and the coalition government had convinced many intellectuals that the communists alone could provide an effective alternative to capitalism and fascism. There was the excitement, an air of conspiracy and comradeship which must have appealed to the flamboyance in Fenton's character and given him comfort in his loneliness. There was talk of going to Spain. Some had gone, like Cornford from Cambridge, never to return. Smiley could imagine Fenton in those days, volatile and earnest, no doubt bringing to his companions the experience of real suffering, a veteran among cadets. His parents had died. His father had been a banker with the foresight to keep a small account in Switzerland. There had not been much, but enough to see him through Oxford and protect him from the cold wind of poverty. Smiley remembered so well the interview with Fenton, one among many, yet different. Different because of the language. Fenton was so articulate, so quick, so sure. Their greatest day, he had said, was when the miners came. They came from the Ronda, you know, and to the comrades it seemed the spirit of freedom had come down with them from the hills. It was a hunger march. It never seemed to occur to the group that the marchers might actually be hungry, but it occurred to me. We hired a truck and the girls made stew, tons of it. We got the meat cheap from a sympathetic butcher in the market. We drove the truck out to meet them. They ate the stew and marched on. They didn't like us really, didn't trust us. He laughed. They were so small. That's what I remember best, small and dark like elves. I hoped they'd sing, and they did. But not for us. For themselves. That was the first time I had met Welshmen. It made me understand my own race better, I think. I'm a Jew, you know. Smiley nodded. They didn't know what to do when the Welshman had gone. But what do you do when a dream has come true? They realized then why the party didn't much care about intellectuals. I think they felt cheap mostly, and ashamed. Ashamed of their beds and their rooms full of bellies of their clever essays. Ashamed of their talents and their humour. They're always saying how Kerr Hardy taught himself shorthand with a piece of chalk on the coalface, you know. They're ashamed of having pencils and paper. But it's no good just throwing them away, is it? That's what I learnt in the end. That's why I left the party, I suppose. Smiley wanted to ask him how Fenton himself had felt. But Fenton was talking again. He had shared nothing with them. He had come to realize that. They were not men, but children who dreamed of freedom fires, gypsy music, and one world tomorrow, who rode on white horses across the Bay of Biscay, or with a child's pleasure bought beer for starving elves from Wales, children who had no power to resist the eastern sun, and obediently turned their tousled heads towards it. They loved each other, and believed they loved mankind. They fought each other, and believed they fought the world. Soon he found them comic and touching. To him, they might as well have knitted socks for soldiers. The disproportion between the dream and reality drove him to a close examination of both. He put all his energy into the philosophical and historical reading, and found, to his surprise, comfort and peace in the intellectual purity of Marxism. He feasted on its intellectual ruthlessness, was thrilled by its fearlessness, its academic reversal of traditional values. In the end, it was this and not the party that gave him strength in his solitude, a philosophy which exacted total sacrifice to an unassailable formula, which humiliated and inspired him. And when he finally found success, prosperity, and integration, he turned his back sadly upon it as a treasure he had outgrown and must leave at Oxford with days of his youth. This was how Fenton had described it, and Smiley had understood. It was scarcely a story of anger and resentment, as Smiley had come to expect in such interviews, but, perhaps because of that, it seemed more real. There was another thing about the interview. Smiley's conviction that Fenton had left something important unsaid. Was there any factual connection between the incident in Bywater Street and Fenton's death? Smiley reproached himself for being carried away. Seen in perspective, there was nothing but the sequence of events to suggest that Fenton and Smiley were part of a single problem. The sequence of events, that is, and the weight of Smiley's intuition, experience, or what you will, the extra sense that had told him to ring the bell and not use his key, the sense that did not, however, warn him that a murderer stood in the night with the piece of lead piping. The interview had been informal, that was true. The walk in the park reminded him more of an Oxford than of Whitehall. The walk in the park, the cafe in Millbank. Yes, there had been a procedural difference too, but what did it amount to? An official of the Foreign Office walking in the park, talking earnestly with an anonymous little man. Unless the little man was not anonymous. Smiley took a paperback book and began to write in pencil on the flyleaf. Let us assume, what is by no means proven, that the murder of Fenton and the attempted murder of Smiley are related. What circumstances connected Smiley with Fenton before Fenton's death? 1. Before the interview on Monday, the 2nd of January, I had never met Fenton. I read his file at the department. I had certainly preliminary inquiries made. 2. On the 2nd of January, I went alone to the Foreign Office by taxi. The FO arranged the interview, but did not, repeat, not, know in advance who would conduct it. Fenton, therefore, had no prior knowledge of my identity, nor had anyone else outside the department. 3. The interview fell into 2 parts. The first at the FO, when people wandered through the room and took no notice of us at all. The second, outside when anyone could have seen us. What followed? Nothing. Unless... Yes, that was the only possible conclusion. Unless whoever saw them together recognized not only Fennin, but Smiley as well, and was violently opposed to their association. Why? In what way was Smiley dangerous? His eyes suddenly opened very wide. Of course. In one way only. As a security officer. He put down his pencil. And so whoever killed Sam Fennin was anxious that he should not talk to a security officer. Someone in the Foreign Office, perhaps. But essentially someone who knew Smiley too. Someone Fennin had known at Oxford, known as a communist, someone who feared exposure, who thought that Fennin would talk, had talked already perhaps. And if he had talked already, then of course Smiley would have to be killed. Killed quickly, before he could put in his report. That would explain the murder of Fennin and the assault on Smiley. It made some sense, but not much. He had built a card house as high as it would go, and he still had cards in his hand. What about Elsa? Her lies, her complicity, her fear? What about the car and the 8:30 call? What about the anonymous letter? If the murderer was frightened of contact between Smiley and Fennin, he would scarcely call attention to Fennin by denouncing him. Who then? Who? He lay back and closed his eyes. His head was throbbing again. Perhaps Peter Gwilym could help. He was the only hope. His head was going round. It hurt terribly. 9. Tidying up. Mendel showed Peter Gwilym into the ward, grinning hugely. Got him, he said. The conversation was awkward, strained for Gwilym at least by the recollection of Smiley's abrupt resignation and the incongruity of meeting in a hospital ward. Smiley was wearing a blue bed jacket, his hair was spiky and untidy above the bandages, and he still had the trace of a heavy bruise on his left temple. After a particularly awkward pause, Smiley said, Look, Peter, Mendel's told you what happened to me. You're the expert. What do we know about the East German steel mission? Pure as the driven snow, dear boy. Except for their sudden departure. Only about 3 men and a dog in the thing. They hung out in Hampstead somewhere. No one quite knew why they were here or when they first came, but they've done quite a decent job in the last 4 years. What are their terms of reference? God knows. I think they thought when they arrived that they were going to persuade the Board of Trade to break the European steel rings, but they got the cold shoulder. Then they went in for a consular stuff with the accent on machine tools and finished products, exchange of industrial and technical information and so on. Nothing to do with what they came for, but for rather more acceptable, I gather. Who were they? Oh, couple of technicians, Professor Dr. someone and Dr. someone else, couple of girls and a general dog's nobody. Dog's body. Who was the dog's body? Don't know. Some young diplomat to iron out the wrinkles. We have them recorded at the department. I can send you details, I suppose. If you don't mind. No, of course not. There was another awkward pause. Smiley said, Photographs would be a help, Peter. Could you manage that? Yes, of course. Gwilym looked away from Smiley in some embarrassment. We don't know much about the East Germans, really, you know. We get odd bits here and there, but on the whole, there's something of a mystery. If they operate at all, they don't do it under the trade or diplomatic cover. That's why, if you're about right, this chap, it's so odd, him coming from the steel mission. Oh, said Smiley flatly. How do they operate? Said Mendel. It's hard to generalize from the very few isolated cases we do know of. My impression is that they run their agents direct from Germany with no contact between controller and agent in the operational zone. But that must limit them terribly, cried Smiley. You may have to wait months before your agent can travel to a meeting place outside his own country. He may not have the necessary cover to make the journey at all. Well, obviously it does limit him, but their targets seem to be so insignificant. They prefer to run foreign nationals, Swedes, expatriate Poles and whatnot, on short-term missions, but the limitations of their technique don't matter. In exceptional cases where they have an agent resident in the target country, they work on a courier system, which corresponds to the Soviet pattern. Smiley was listening now. As a matter of fact, Gwynner went on, the Americans intercepted a courier quite recently, which is where we learned the little we do know about GDR technique. Such as what? Oh, well, never waiting at a rendezvous, never meeting at the stated time but 20 minutes before, recognition signals, all the usual conjuring tricks that give a gloss to low-grade information. They muck about with names, too. A courier may have to contact 3 or 4 agents. A controller may run as many as 15. They never invent cover names for themselves. What do you mean? Surely they must. They get the agent to do it for them. The agent chooses a name, any name he likes, and the controller adopts it. A gimmick, really. He stopped, looking at Mendel in surprise. Mendel had leaped to his feet. Gwillem sat back in his chair and wondered if he were allowed to smoke. He decided reluctantly that he wasn't. He could have done with a cigarette. Well, said Smiley. Mendel had described to Gwillem his interview with Mr. Scar. It fits, said Gwillem. Obviously it fits with what we know, but then we don't know all that much. If Blondie was a courier, it is exceptional, in my experience at least, that we should use a trade delegation as a staging post. You said the mission had been here 4 years, said Mendel. Blondie first came to Scar 4 years ago. No one spoke for a moment. And Smiley said earnestly, Peter, is it possible? Isn't it? I mean, they might, under certain operational conditions, need to have a station over here as well as couriers. Well, of course, if they were onto something really big, they might. Meaning, if they had a highly placed resident agent in play? Yes, roughly. And assuming they had such an agent, a McLean or Fuse, it is inconceivable that they would establish a station here under trade cover with no operational function except to hold the agent's hand. Yes, it's conceivable, but it's a tall order, George. What you're suggesting is that the agent is run from abroad, serviced by courier, and the courier is serviced by the mission, which is also the agent's personal guardian angel. You'd have to be some agent. I'm not suggesting quite that, but near enough. And I accept that the system demands a high-grade agent. Don't forget, we only have Blondie's word for it that he came from abroad. Mendel chipped in. This agent, would it be in touch with the mission direct? Good Lord, no, said Gwillem. He'd probably have an emergency procedure for getting in touch with them. A telephone code or something of the sort. How does that work? Asked Mendel. Varies. Might be on the wrong number system. You dial the number from a call box and ask to speak to George Brown. You're told George Brown doesn't live there, so you apologize and ring off. The time and the rendezvous are prearranged. The emergency signal is contained in the name you asked for. Someone will be there. What else would the mission do? Asked Smiley. Hard to say. Pay him, probably. Arrange a collecting place for reports. The controller would make all those arrangements for the agent, of course, and tell him his part of it by courier. They work on the Soviet principle a good deal, as I told you. Even the smallest details are arranged by control. The people in the field are allowed very little independence. There was another silence. Smiley looked at Gwillem and then at Mendel and blinked and said, "Blondie didn't come to Scar in January or February, did he?" "No," said Mendel. "This was the first year." Fennon always went skiing in January and February. This was the first time in 4 years he'd missed. "I wonder," said Smiley, "whether I ought to go and see Maston again." Gwillem stretched luxuriously and smiled. "You can always try. He'd be thrilled to hear you've been brained. I have a sneaking feeling he'll think Battersea's on the coast. Not to worry. Tell him you were attacked while wandering about in someone's private yard. You'll understand. Tell him about your assailant too, George. You've never seen him, mind, and you don't know his name. But he's a courier of the East German Intelligence Service. Maston will back you up, he always does. Especially if he's got to report to the minister." Smiley looked at Gwillem and said nothing. "After you bang on the head too," Gwillem added. "He'll understand." "But Peter—" "I know, George, I know. Well, let me tell you another thing. Blondie collected his car on the first Tuesday of each month. So, those are the nights Elsa Fenner went to the Weybridge Rep. Fenner worked late on Tuesday, she said." Gwillem got up. "Let me dig about, George." "Cheerio, Mendel. I'll probably give you a ring tonight. I don't see what we can do now anyway, but it would be nice to know, wouldn't it?" He reached the door. "Incidentally, where are Fennon's possessions? Wallet, diary, and so forth. Stuff they found on the body." "Probably still at the station," said Mendel, "until after the inquest." Gwillem stood looking at Smiley for a moment, wondering what to say. "Anything you want, George?" "No, thanks. There is one thing." "Yes?" "Could you get the CID off my back? They visited me 3 times now, and of course they got nowhere locally. Could you make this an intelligence matter for the time being? Be mysterious and soothing?" "Yes, I should think so." "I know it's difficult, Peter, because I'm not... Oh, another thing, just to cheer you up. I had that comparison made between Fennon's suicide note and anonymous letter. They were done by different people on the same machine. Different pleasures, precious spacing, but identical typeface. So long, oh dear. Tuck into the grapes." Gwillem closed the door behind him. They heard his footsteps echoing crisply down the bare corridor. Mendel rolled himself a cigarette. "Lord," said Smiley, "does nothing frighten you? Haven't you seen the sister here?" Mendel grinned and shook his head. "You can only die once," he said, putting the cigarette between his thin lips. Smiley watched him light it. He produced his lighter, took the hood off it, and rotated the wheel with his strained thumb, swiftly cupping both hands around it and nursing the flame towards the cigarette. There might have been a hurricane blowing. "Well, you're the crime expert," said Smiley. "How are we doing?" "Messy," said Mendel, "and tidy." "Why?" "Loose ends everywhere, no police work, nothing checked, like algebra." "What's algebra got to do with it?" "You got to prove what can be proved first, find the constants. Did she really go to the theatre? Was she alone? Did the neighbours hear her coming back? If so, what time? Was Fenner really late Tuesdays? Did his missus go to the theatre regularly every fortnight like she said? And the 8:30 call. Can you tidy that for me?" "You got that call on the brain, haven't you?" "Yes. Of all the loose ends, that's the loosest. I brood over it, you know, and there isn't just any sense in it. I've been through this train, his train timetable. He was a punctual man, often got to the FO before anyone else, unlocked his own cupboard. He would have caught the 8:54, the 9:08, or at worst, the 9:14. The 8:54 got him at 9:38. He liked to be at his office by 9:45. He can possibly want to be woken up at 8:30. Perhaps he just liked bells, said Mendel, getting up. And the letters, Smiley continued. Different typists, but the same machine. Discounting the murderer, 2 people had access to that machine, Fennon and his wife. If we accept that Fennon typed the suicide note, and he certainly signed it, we must accept that it was Elsa who typed the denunciation. Why did she do that? Smiley was tired out, relieved that Mendel was going. Off to tidy up, find the constants. You'll need the money, said Smiley, and offered him some from the wallets beside his bed. Mendel took it without ceremony and left. Smiley lay back. His head was throbbing madly, burning hot. He thought of calling the nurse, and cowardice prevented him. Gradually, the throbbing eased. He heard from outside the ringing of an ambulance bell as it turned off Prince of Wales Drive into the hospital yard. Perhaps he's just like bells, he muttered, and fell asleep. He was woken by the sound of an argument in the corridor. He heard the sister's voice raised in protest. He heard footsteps, and Mendel's voice, urgent in contradiction. The door opened suddenly, and someone put the lights on. He blinked and sat up, glancing at his watch. It was 6:15. Mendel was talking to him, almost shouting. What was he trying to say? Something about Battersea Bridge, the river police, missing since yesterday. He was wide awake. Adam Scar was dead. "10. The Virgin's Story." Mendel drove very well, with a kind of schoolmamish pedantry that Smiley would have found comic. The Weybridge Road was packed with traffic as usual. Mendel hated motorists. Give a man a car of his own, and he leaves humility and common sense behind him in the garage. He didn't care who it was. He'd seen bishops in purple doing 70 in built-up area, frightening the pedestrians out of their wits. He liked Smiley's car. He liked the fussy way it had been maintained, the sensible extras, wing mirrors and reversing light. It was a decent little car. He liked people who looked after things, who finished what they began. He liked thoroughness and precision, no skimping, like this murderer. What had Scar said? Young mind, but cool as charity. He knew that look, and Scar known it too, the look of a complete negation that reposes in the eyes of a young killer. Not the look of a wild beast, not the grinning savagery of a maniac, but the look born of supreme efficiency, tried and proven. It was a stage beyond the experience of war. The witnessing of death in war brings a sophistication of its own, but beyond that, far beyond, is the conviction of supremacy in the heart of the professional killer. Yes, Mendel had seen it before, the one that stood apart from the gang, pale-eyed, expressionless, the one the girls went after, spoke of without smiling. Yes, he was a cool one, all right. Scar's death had frightened Mendel. He made Smiley promise not to go back to Bywater Street when he was released from the hospital. With any luck, they'd think he was dead anyway. Scar's death proved one thing, of course. The murderer was still in England, still anxious to tidy up. Hello.